Proverbs 27, verses 15 to 27, the overall counsel is that God's wisdom teaches us the difference between what we can and cannot control. In verses 15 and 16, it talks about a man who lives with a contentious, nagging wife, and the image is of somebody trying to take shelter under a roof in a rainstorm, but the roof is leaky and he gets wet anyway. Likewise, a husband wants to take refuge in his wife and to feel supported, encouraged, and loved, but all she does is pick fights and criticize him. And of course, he would love to change her and get her to stop doing that. But the truth is, trying to restrain her is like restraining the wind and trying to grasp oil in your hand that just runs out all over the place, because he can't really control her behavior. And in fact, trying to control her would probably only make things worse. And so the wisest thing would be to focus on controlling himself and his own behavior as a husband, because the truth is, she might be contentious and nagging because she feels unsafe with him. Maybe he's not handling his responsibilities in the home or being affectionate and telling her how much he loves her. And so the best thing he can do is control himself and how he treats her and leave it to God to change her heart. In verse 17, it's pretty much out of our control that we're going to clash with other people and there's going to be friction and conflict. But what we can control is how we respond to that, and to make sure that when we're in conflict with people, it sharpens us and makes us better, just like a blacksmith's hammer shapes and molds an iron sword. In verse 18, you may find yourself a slave to a master because you sold yourself into slavery to pay off debt. And being a slave is out of your control. There's nothing you can do about it. But what you can do is be the best slave in the world and honor your master. And when you do that, your master will honor and take care of you. Just like being diligent to prune and tend to a fig tree will yield fruit for you. In verse 19, you can control the kind of heart that you develop so that everyone around you will know your true character when they see your heart reflected in your actions. I can't control other people's hearts and other people's behavior, but I can absolutely work on my own heart and behavior. In verse 20, I cannot control death. Sheol, which is the realm of the dead, and Abaddon, which means destruction, are never satisfied. Sheol is the place where the dead go, and Abaddon refers to what death does, which is to destroy. And there's no way that I can stop the grave from consuming the dead, nor can I do anything to control the greed of man. There are always going to be people who are dissatisfied with what they have in life and may even come after me for what I have. But that's not in my control. There will always be people like that, just as surely as there will always be people who die. In verse 21, I cannot control what people say about me and whether people praise me or not. But what I can control is how I respond to that praise. Because Solomon says praise is a test of your character. How we respond when people praise us is like putting silver and gold through a furnace to test it for impurities. And if I let that praise go to my head, well, then I've failed the test. In verse 22, there are people in life who will never change, no matter what happens to them. You could grind them in a mortar with a pestle, crushing them to the point where they hit rock bottom, and they still won't learn. And if I spend my life trying to change people who are unwilling to change, it'll destroy me and I'll feel like I'm the one that's been crushed. And then in verses 23 to 27, we cannot control the future. We don't know what's going to happen. It's very possible in verse 24 that we lose our riches. But what I can control is my preparation for the future. And I can know well the condition of my flocks. I can pay attention and be a good manager of my possessions and my money and my animals, so that I'll be well supplied in case things go sideways in the future. And that's the challenge for us today, to know the difference between what we can and cannot control. It's such a crucial skill in life, because when you try to control the uncontrollables, it leads to nothing but stress and worry and anxiety, which is why Jesus said in Matthew 6 and verse 34, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." There are plenty of things within our control that we can do right now that take up plenty of our time and energy and effort. And we don't need to make things harder on ourselves by trying to control things we can't do anything about, either because it's in the future or because it has to do with someone else's behavior or because it's something that will never change no matter what we do. In the end, the only thing we can really control is ourselves and how we respond to life's circumstances in our hearts and in our actions. We can absolutely try to influence people and help others change their behavior. We can even make preparations for the future. But part of having wisdom is recognizing our limitations. And there are limits to what we can control. And this points to Christ, because even though he was God's son and he had all power and could do anything he wanted, even he understood there were things beyond his control. For instance, when he went to his hometown of Nazareth, it says in Mark 6 verses 5 and 6 that he could do no miracle there, except that he laid hands on a few sick people and healed them, and he wondered at their unbelief. He could control what he said to them and tell them that he's a prophet, but he could not control their response. Same thing in Jerusalem when they rejected him and he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I longed to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you were unwilling." Jesus did everything he could within his control, but he could not control how they responded to him because that was up to their own free will choice. He could influence them, but he could not force them to change. And of course, in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before his crucifixion, he understood he could not control the will of his Father. He could ask and try to influence his Father to change his will and not make him go through with this. But when he said, "Not my will, but yours be done," Jesus was accepting his limitations and realizing there are things he can and cannot control. And truth be told, Jesus could have controlled that situation. He could have stopped his crucifixion, but he chose to limit his ability to control the situation and put all of the control in his Father's hands. In other words, Jesus gave up control in order to save our souls. And as we call on God for wisdom today, I want to borrow from the famous serenity prayer and pray, "God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference."